Hey, Katie Hardie, this is Bill Plock with Colorado's Ride, and we're excited to talk to you today about basically nutrition and getting ready for the summer coming up and how to get your body in shape to tackle these Colorado mountains on a bike. And would love to get some of your thoughts. And you live in the mountains, you've been around this for a couple decades now, and helping people get ready for events and sporting things and life in general. And I'd love to share all your knowledge with our audience. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and we'll get diving into it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I am Katie, as you said, and I grew up in Iowa, moved out to Denver over 20 years ago, dating myself, and did the corporate world scene. Wasn't my jam, kind of followed my passion, which was strength and conditioning, that then kind of led me to nutrition, led me into personal chefing, led me into becoming board certified in holistic nutrition and then getting trained in how to run and read functional labs, where it's a way to look at people's gut health, hormone health, blood chemistry through narrow functional ranges so we can optimize performance and health, and rather than looking for disease or diagnosing things. So I kind of combine all those backgrounds and just help really driven people learn more about themselves and figure out a personalized plan so they can start their roadmap to wherever they're wanting it to go.
Yeah, and before we talked, or before we hit record, I guess, we talked about how the balance of the body. You have your physical, you got to train, you got to recover and sleep, and nutrition. They all work really well together. But I think sometimes people ignore one or more than one of those sort of things. How do you look at the whole picture to start with when you're talking to somebody about basically their health and getting ready to perform?
Yeah, that's a really great question because a lot of times we focus very heavily in our culture on the workout component and the nutrition component, which are very important. And upstream of all of that is kind of this overall stress load that our bodies either can or cannot handle. So with nutrition, for example, it's not what you just eat, but it's what you eat, digest, and absorb. And so sometimes when we have whether it's external stressors, internal stressors, like training is actually a stressor that we use to our advantage. But without appropriate recovery, it becomes a bigger stressor and we actually can get weaker and overreach and not actually perform as well as we're trying to with that. So things that create chronic stressors, again, not the short-term stress with the appropriate adaptation we're looking for performance, but when it's chronic over days, weeks, years, that's when it can start affecting normal function. So things like digestion and absorption. We don't produce enough digestive enzymes to absorb the food that we're trying to get the nutrients from. It could affect our immunity. So, you're not out there competing if you're sick, at home. So those things are important, but a lot of times they get overshadowed by the more glamorous things like what's the conditioning program, what's the training program, what's the race, what are we eating? And those are all, again, very important. Just the recovery aspect, I think, gets minimized in our culture because it's not glamorous, it's not sexy,
Right.
it's like oh well, especially in endurance sports. I've done endurance stuff for a bit back in the day, but I had my little stint with triathlons, and it tends to be a very type A culture where if this is good, more is better.
Yeah.
um, but it's not necessarily that way. It's smarter is better, not more is better. And so to really maximize performance, some of the most underutilized ergogenic aids, we could call them, are sleep and recovery. And that's almost harder for people to do than do the extra workout, do the extra mile, get the really clean like food and make all these dishes, meal prepping ahead of time. So again, not trying to minimize that. There's a lot of underutilized aspects to performance more in the down tempo activities like sleep and recovery. Nutrition's a part of that when it's used strategically. That can kind of fall into that recovery bucket. But I'd say in general, people have the training part down. It's the how do you maximize your body's ability to train most effectively or perform at your peak at the right time.
I think people are drawn to the performance side because they can measure how
Yes.
fast or how
Hmm.
far. And I
Yep.
know there's tools like Inside Tracker and some of those that measure your sleep and your
Yeah.
and some other levels of things in your bodies. But I think nutrition in particular is really hard to like measure its effectiveness. Do you have a way to do that?
Yeah. And so you're right on that because everybody's got their Strava and like, oh, look what I did here. But nobody's like, oh, check out my, now they are a little bit with, the HRV, the heart rate variability and like the watch and devices. But most people aren't like, oh, check out like my sleep. They're more aware of it if they have that. They understand like, oh, I'm under recovered, but what does that really mean? And then back to your nutrition question. This is something I get a lot is like, well, what do I eat on game day?
Mhm.
And that's important. And it's kind of like training for a race. It's what you do in the 3, 6, 9 months leading up to it, right? Like nobody's thinking, oh, I'm going to go sign up for that half Ironman that's 2 weeks out. Like that would be kind of ridiculous for most people.
Right.
So yes, you could do it. And finish and whatnot. But if you're looking for optimal performance, it's what you do all the months leading up to it because what you eat becomes the building blocks of your cells. And that's what's going to affect your muscle protein synthesis. So when you're training, you're breaking down muscle, we need to put it back together. And most people are trying to get either faster, stronger, or some combination of that. So you need to have protein for that. You need carbohydrates to replenish your muscle glycogen, but not all carbohydrates are created equally. Not all proteins are created equally. Fats, like we love to like rotate through the best and evil macronutrient of the decade or whatever. They're all important for different reasons, like our joints need some love, our muscles need some loves, our brain needs some help. All parts of our body have different nutritional needs, and getting those in a variety, that's what's going to set people up for optimal performance, but recovery, because certain foods are going to help that body recover. We know the sooner we recover, the faster we can get back to training, or the faster we can get back out to, another race and be performing.
So you mentioned it takes a while to build all that into your system. And here we are in March. Our ride is at the end of August, and we'll have events coming up this summer. People have, 3 to 4 months before most of their events are going to happen. What's the strategy starting out in terms of like, and how long does it take your body to really perfectly build up all of those micronutrients? Because it's not overnight, it's not in 1 week, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Well, everybody's different. It's that bio individuality. Where to start? So some people, if they're already eating pretty clean or eating a lot of whole real foods, probably not going to take too long because they're probably most of the way there. If somebody's eating more that standard American diet, a lot of processed foods, a lot of breads, a lot of pastas, a lot of cereals, a lot of like refined grains, that's inflammatory. That slows your recovery down. So one of the like lower hanging, I guess, accessible shifts is just start with real food. Just if it looks like it does in nature, like think about, like a grain of rice, like what that is, right? A
Yeah.
potato compared to like a piece of bread. If you've never made it or never looked at a label, you might not know all the things in it, but the piece of bread is pretty far removed from the wheat that grew in the field, right? So, whether it's fish or chicken or shrimp or beans or quinoa, pick your food, peppers. The closer it is to how it was grown or produced, that's what we're going for. So if you can
Okay.
just start by reducing, and it doesn't need, and this is something I see with people too. They're like, well, if I'm not doing it 100%, why even bother, right? Well, because
Right.
it's a cumulative impact. Any shift you make, if you keep it day after day after day, from now till August, you've got, 5, 6 months for that to start making little shifts that over time add up and become significant. So
And
it's not about being perfect. It's about what's the one thing I want to shift to. Maybe somebody's not eating any vegetables. Those provide a lot of antioxidants that can really help with recovery. Maybe it's chewing your food. A lot of people don't chew their food all the way. And that gets back to, if you don't chew your food, you're going to pass all those amazing nutrients right through. So then it becomes really expensive food that you're not actually benefiting from because your cells aren't receiving it. So I think the biggest step is start small. Pick one thing you can be consistent with, and it might be hydration. It might be in the food category, but just pick one thing and go real food as much as possible.
You just said hydration. I don't want to get too far down that road, but is there a way to know if you're, basically perfectly hydrated? You're never either over hydrated or underhydrated. You're somewhere in the spectrum, but how do you know?
Looking at your urine is a good, you want it like pale yellow. I do blood labs on people and I can tell from there, a little bit because there's urinalysis. So that'll tell us, but even some of the blood markers will be affected when you're dehydrated. You don't feel that you're dehydrated when you're 1% dehydrated. Like you don't feel it, but it starts affecting cognitive and physical performance.
At
So
1%.
yeah. The other thing is sometimes people will take a big old thing like this and just like chug a bunch and then like, all right, I'm good. But if you think about like a sprinkler, like a light sprinkler versus a really dry, hard ground that gets like flash flood, like
Right.
big rain, it doesn't absorb it because it's coming at it so fast, so much that a lot of it washes off. So things that can help you stay more hydrated with less volume is sipping slowly throughout the day versus like one big, jar at one time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just little things like that can make big differences too.
So let's say you start to shift, you're eating more whole foods, more whatever protein, whether it's meat or soy or some other kind of protein. Can you wreck it all with a couple of too many beers in a night? Or you know what I mean? Like, can you just tear it all down in an instant?
Again, it kind of comes to the like, what's the cumulative impact, right? If
Yeah.
that's an every night thing, then that's what, 14 beers a week times 4 times 12, versus if that's just on Fridays, then that's 1/7 of the amount. So everybody's body also has a different capacity based upon all the other stressors they have going on in their life. How much training is going on? Are there work stressors? Are there financial stressors? Is there imbalance inside the body that's throwing things off, that's creating an internal stressor they might not know about, but is still affecting cortisol levels? So that's very much, individual based. But again, like it's easy to get like, it's either black or white. I like to help people find the gray because that's reality.
Yeah. Is there shortcuts like this? It's organic, it's got whole foods. I read the label and it's got words I can actually read and understand. I mean, it's probably better than nothing, but is there really a shortcut to this, or am I just fooling myself when I take that?
A shortcut to getting
Just good nutrition. Like it's not cooked. I'm just mixing it with water and makes me feel like, okay, I at least got whatever today.
Yeah. So ideally, we're getting it from real foods. And we also don't want to be like having too little overall energy availability. So that might be the lesser of two evils for somebody. For somebody else who might be 3 laps ahead on the track, they might be dialing it in a little differently. So it kind of depends, like, what are you compare? Like, you want to compare you to you versus you to what somebody else is doing, because it's really easy to get caught up in the weeds. But if you don't have the foundations down, the weeds don't much matter.
Okay.
So
Well,
for like, yeah, if you're up doing
stress.
benders, like not getting sleep, and then like just like burning the candle at both ends, and then training, and you're like, oh, but I have like all these amazing meals, like, all right, but your body's probably not digesting and absorbing it. And like it kind of, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but in the bigger picture, there's other things that are going to have bigger impact.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we're circling around a key word a little bit is stress.
Yes, exactly.
Stressor from training, stressor from life, stressor from not good eating or whatever. So you can control what you eat. You can control how much you train. You can control how much you rest. You can't control, outward emotions that come to you from work sometimes, or family or whatever. So I think, or I guess the takeaway here is nutrition is just a really big part of that stress reduction, proper nutrition. Is that fair?
Yes, exactly, because certain food or food-like substances can be another stressor on the body, or they can be nourishing to the body. And, this is getting in the weeds, but when people are further down, certain foods can be supportive to one person, but kind of not so much for another person. And so that's where and why we don't have just like one diet that works for everybody. And that's why you see people kind of infighting, or it should be this way. This works for me. No, it should be this way. It's like vegan, carnivore, and at the end of the day, we're all different. Different diets can be really successful for different people. And within the same person, we have different needs at different times in our life. Females have different needs at different times of the cycle because of the hormones. When we're training for something versus off season, we have different nutritional needs, but we like to, be very, I guess, rigid about it, or it makes it more predictable. But we're like, well, here's the exact equation every single day, but we don't have the exact same needs every day. And that's where it gets gray, and that's where it can get kind of confusing for people. But that's a big part of what I really like to help people do, is tune in to what feedback their body's giving them, because you don't need to have a math equation for these things. We never used to have like trackers or like calculators to figure out how many macros and calories we need. Like, you can innately figure these things out. You don't need to get so detailed with it. It can provide structure and be somewhat helpful for guidance, but sometimes the stress of trying to be so perfect about it can outweigh the benefits of whatever it is you're trying to stress about.
So what is a micronutrient?
Micronutrient.
Yeah.
So macronutrients are like carbohydrates, proteins, fats. And
Okay.
so that's, when we talk about macros, that's what that is. And within those, micronutrients are like vitamins, minerals. That's what's getting into the cells. That's what's providing your body the information so it knows what to do and can do the things it's supposed to do.
I mean, like muscles need glucose to function,
That's a
right? That's
macro.
an energy
Mm-hmm.
that's produced by your body
Yep.
with a combination of, I guess, different carbohydrates and proteins, but
Yep.
there's
And
always a
so
ratio, right?
when we're getting into the micronutrients, we're talking about like, if you like electrolytes, is kind of a big thing out there. So those are all minerals. You have potassium, sodium, calcium, and those are micronutrients. We need different micronutrients at different levels. Some we deplete more when we're sick, some we deplete more when we're training. But that's a component of nutrition.
Got it. And then how do you measure all of this? I mean, I assume it comes into like a blood test or skin or a draw of your body fluids and different things like
Yeah.
that. How do you assess all this with patients?
Well, you can do a micronutrient panel. So, kind of similar to when I said nutrition isn't just what you eat, but what you eat, digest, and absorb. Sometimes we eat things or supplement with things and it's circulating in our blood. But what we need it to do is get into the blood cell, or to the cell, like inside the cell. And
Right.
so if it's not getting into the cell, it's not having the full impact. And so there's a micronutrient panel that will measure the blood levels and the intra and intercellular levels. So that's kind of a way to see how much people are actually absorbing. So common deficiencies I see are magnesium, B12, folate. Omega-3s tend to be low, and those are very anti-inflammatory. The B vitamins help with energy production. Magnesium can be calming, help people fall asleep and stay asleep at night. These are things that we tend to deplete more under stress.
Mhm.
And when we're under stress, so we don't absorb as much and we need more. So it's kind of like this double whammy. So that's why recovery is also very important from an athlete perspective, because you want to make sure you're not depleting your body or creating more overall stress. So you want to use that stress and adaptation to your advantage. And that's the whole concept of periodization, where you like stress the body and then things temporarily get weaker, you give it recovery time, And then it comes back, not just to baseline, but a little bit stronger than it was before. And that's the whole concept behind like having different seasons and having your, your A race, your B race, your C race, like which one's the most important. So you're like peaking a little bit for, your CB, but like the biggest peak or the most important one, you're really recovered. And I mean, it's all kind of like why you taper before a big race, right?
Sure.
You see the people who don't know about that and sign up like a month before and they're like, I'm gonna go run every day. And then like anybody who's been doing this, you're like, wow, that's not a great idea, but
Yeah. Yeah. Can you do that nutritionally though? I mean, I feel like
great
nutrition
eyes.
is more of a ramp, like, and then a plateau, as opposed to like, eating a bunch and then famine, fasting, I mean, or
Yeah, you talk about
yeah.
periodizing your food.
Yeah. Can you do
Yeah,
that?
big time. Yep.
Really?
So one of the biggest levers you do that with is carbohydrates. So the more you're exerting or the higher volume you have, the more you need to replenish that muscle glycogen or energy in the muscle
Sure.
and liver.
So
Um,
that makes sense.
yeah, same with protein. The more you're tearing out in your muscles, the more you need. Our cellular membranes always need quality fats. They just kind of sometimes get lost in conversation. It doesn't mean they're not important. It's,
Yeah.
and then there's like anti-inflammatory and inflammatory. So fried, the oils they use in restaurants to fry things, those are going to be the inflammatory oils and seed oils versus things like olive oil, ghee, which is clarified butter,
Mhm.
things that are natural and not more chemically made.
I bet you don't love eating out, do you?
It's tough because I did culinary school and I didn't grow up knowing how to cook. So it was life-changing for me. And that's part of what I try to do is teach people how to efficiently make food that your body needs taste amazing. And so once you've learned how to season things, when you go out to a restaurant, you're like, I could use a lemon or a little more salt or,
Yeah,
but there's tons of great restaurants out there that do a great job. Just
sure.
the mountains can be slim pickings at times.
Well, yeah, we could dive into this all day long. I love hearing about it, but hopefully we'll have our cycling symposium in April.
Yeah.
We'll announce that soon, and hopefully people see this will come and see Katie live and talk about some of this stuff in more depth. And in the meantime, though, Katie, how can people work with you?
Oh, yes, I have a website. It's Hardie, spelled Hardie, Peak, like the mountain peak, Peak Performance. So HardiePeakPerformance.com. I'm on Instagram at Hardie Peak Performance and then Facebook, same thing.
And
So
how do you work with people from all over? Because I know you do remote.
Oh, yep, great question. Because these labs are either shipped to people or they're a blood lab at, they're like local lab core or hospital. I actually work remotely with people. So over Zoom like this. And I get the results and then we first meet to see if it's a good fit, if it makes sense for their goals and what they're wanting to do. And then all my contact info is on there. I've got lots of videos and pictures and information about the types of things. So if people just want even new recipe ideas, I try to give, just like a weekly recipe idea for the real food we we're talking about. So if you're just looking for content to absorb, I try to give like a weekly podcast recommendation. So if you're out there driving or, trying to start prepping more food and shopping, it's a good thing to listen to. Walk your dog, monthly book recommendations, and then just events that are coming up. So yeah.
When do you sleep and recover? Because you got a lot of things going on,
Yeah, there's a few. I I didn't used to be this way. I used to have the motto, you can sleep when you're dead, but
right?
that starts sneaking up with you in your 30s and 40s. So I do try to keep boundaries around bedtime. And I do try to get to bed between 9:30 and 10 because I get up in the 5 o'clock hour because I like to get after it in the morning. So that's something
Awesome.
I've learned with age, maybe wisdom, hopefully, is that recovery is really important. And for me, I needed to see how bad my numbers were on the labs. And
Mhm.
honestly, like once I started prioritizing recovery, my strength like shot back up. Like it's like one of those things like the frog in slowly boiling water. You don't really notice how tired you're getting or how under recovered you are. And then once you start getting, like appropriate recovery, like, wow, I can really like bang out those pull-ups again, or, like squat way more weight than I was. And it makes you stronger and more, resilient, faster sprint times. So I think, yeah, I've had to learn the hard way,
Mhm.
but I think most of us do, right?
Right, for sure. Well, cool. Thanks again, and look forward to doing this in person in a month and a half or so.
Me too. Thank you so much.